Today we are going to be working on a 2006 Camry. This has a valve cover gasket leak going on here. So the first thing we're going to do is take off this plastic cover here, and it's secured by two 10mm nuts. After that, this should come right off. There are two more points where it presses in here in these back corners. Now the next thing we're going to do is take off the negative terminal on the battery. And while we're digging down to get to the valve cover, to replace the valve cover gasket, we're going to be disconnecting some electrical connectors. And disconnecting the negative terminal on the battery will make sure that you don't fry your ECU or mess with your computer in any way. So now that we have this disconnected, we can start by taking things off of the valve cover, the coil packs, and removing the valve cover itself. Before I take anything apart, I want to make sure that I can get it all back together when it's all said and done. So I'm simply just cleaning off the top of these coil packs. I'm going to number them so I don't mix them up. Now the wiring will only let you put them in the correct hole, but just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and number these. I have just a paint marker here. Perfect. Now I'm going to let this dry for like a second, and all these bolts on top of here that you're going to need to take off the valve cover with are 10mm nuts and bolts. So I'm going to let this dry, come back in like 5 minutes, and then we'll start taking everything apart. So now that I've given the paint a little bit of time to dry, I'm going to start breaking these coil packs loose. 10mm will do the trick. And as you take these out, you might want to label these bolts where they go back to, especially if you are kind of new to working on your own car. This will keep everything organized, so when you get back to putting it together, you don't have a handful of bolts and no idea where to go. So, got those bolts out. Now I'm just going to gently pull these up, move these out of the way. I'm going to try to do this without disconnecting the coil packs, because the last time I worked on this vehicle, the clip actually broke. So I'm going to try not to break any clips today, and what I'm running into is a little bit of a limitation on this wire here. It's connected to the valve cover right here, so I'm going to take that bolt off. Okay, got this off, going to set this to the side, and that should give me enough clearance to get the rest of the coil packs off. So move this wiring as far out of the way as I can. So there is one more wiring harness bracket that I need to take off, and it's right here on the passenger side. Again, using my 10mm, I'm going to take this bolt off, set this down to the side, move this wiring harness out of the way. Hopefully I can get this valve cover off without having to disconnect the electronics down here. I might have to take off this bolt as well on the alternator. Just a bracket holding that wiring down, and that'll give me some room to play right there. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to disconnect this breather valve right here. This is most likely for the PCV. Could be wrong, but this little hose needs to go. So I'm going to get these channel locks here. There's a proper tool to remove these types of clips. I just use some channel locks and just a little bit of maneuvering to get these things out of the way. Just like that. And then I should be able to pull that off when I have a little bit more room to mess with this valve cover. So I'm going to start at the center here. undo these bolts and then working in a star pattern from the center out. So I'll start at this first one right here. Go into the back, one right here. Going back to the front, this one is a nut. Go into this back corner here. Back up to the front. Back to the back. And then this will be our last bolt. So now that I've cracked them all loose, I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. Now, since the coil packs are off, you don't want to drop any of the bolts into any of these holes right here. It's going to be a headache. You probably will be okay if you have a magnet tool, but if you're someone who runs the bare minimum, sometimes you won't have that tool, so it'll kind of be a pain in the ass. And just a trip to the auto parts store. So just be careful not to drop anything in there. If you want, you can stuff some rags down in there. I'm not going to worry about it today. So just going to keep going, getting all these bolts out. I think this is the last one. Might do one more down the center here. Okay. Now I got those out. I'm going to go ahead and set these down on the bench. There's actually one more hose I need to disconnect, and that's right here. I'm going to use my needle nose pliers this time. Push these two ends together, kind of maneuver this back as I take this off. There you go. Tuck this back under here, that back. And I'm also going to go ahead and disconnect this hose that we took this clamp off of earlier. Cool. Tuck that away as well. Now I'm going to get my soft mallet so I can knock this loose, and we should be ready to replace the gasket. I'm going to go ahead and double check that I have taken off all the nuts and bolts that hold this valve cover on. Looks like I'm good to go. Make sure there's nothing else holding it on. Should be alright, so we'll go ahead and just tap up on this thing. Might be actually able to pry at one of these pry points. Now you don't want to, you want to be careful when you start prying. You definitely don't want to mar any of these surfaces, so just be careful. This shouldn't take too much to come off. As you can see, it's already kind of coming up without me prying very much. You go around to the back and loosen that side up. Now I didn't even have to pry right there. So now, I'm just going to get these wires and just try to maneuver them out of the way while I take this valve cover off. Now, two of these posts are studs. This one actually ended up coming out with the nut. This one I wasn't so lucky. So I'm going to have to lift it over that before I can get it off. There we go. Just being gentle, being patient is how you're going to get this thing off. Alright, so almost home free. Just have this last corner to work out. Going over the cam gears. And there we go. There's our valve cover. Here's our gasket. As you can see, there is a clear separation in this valve cover gasket here. just got old, brittle. This is some pretty hard rubber. So it's probably the original. We're gonna take this off. And now, we're gonna go ahead and clean up this mating surface here with the razor blade and some brake cleaner. So I'm just going to get my razor blade here and run it along the surface here, kind of getting rid of all that grime and old valve cover gasket off of it. And get some brake cleaner, spray this rag here, and kind of just wipe along that surface, making sure it's clean. You also don't want to push debris into your engine as well, so please be mindful of that. Be careful when you're wiping it off like this. Like I said before, if you want to feel more comfortable, stuff some rags in there. So if you do put debris, when you pull out the rags, all that debris will come out with it, and your debris won't go inside of your engine, which could sometimes lead to problems. I'm just going to clean this up. Working my way around, taking a note that right here where the cases meet, there is a little bead of RTV sealant. So when I put this back together, I want to make sure to put some sealant there before I put the gasket on. How I get this old RTV off, just using my straight edge. Takes like 1 second, making sure I get all of it off. Now that this surface is clean, I'm going to go ahead and clean the underside of the valve cover. I'm also going to clean the whole valve cover. It's a little oily. And when I do that, it'll be time to replace the gasket finally. So on the underside of the valve cover gasket here, there's a little channel where that valve cover gasket runs. I'm going to go ahead and spray this with my brake cleaner. And just clean inside of there. Flip it over, and I'm going to start cleaning kind of the outside here, just to kind of clean everything up. I don't like messing with oily parts, it's kind of annoying. Just place down my brake cleaner and just clean all this oil and whatever off of it. Whenever I finish, I'll be checking in with you guys, and it'll be time to put everything back together. So putting in the new gasket is pretty easy. There's just a channel running along the valve cover, and you just put it in there. Remember to line up everything, make sure it all fits perfectly. Now we are dropping it onto the engine. Remember those two spots to place RTV. Placing all the bolts and nuts in place. And I'm just going to drive them down real quick with my impact. I'm not going to be ugga-dugging them down, but just kind of saving some time here. Next, I'm going to put on the oil fill cap, followed by securing these wiring harnesses with the 10mm bolts, and then placing in the coil packs. There's 4 of them, and securing those with their hardware. Right here, I'm just double checking everything with my ratchet. I'm going to put the torque specs up on the screen. And now I'm just making sure these hoses are refitted back to the valve cover. There's one on the forward right position and one on the back left. Now you can just place back on your valve cover fascia, and that secures with those 2 10mm nuts we first removed. That'll be it for the video. Hope you guys learned something, and I will see you guys next time.